Good afternoon. It's Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. That means it's time for Advancement Live, the weekly web show for college and advancement professionals. Welcome. We broadcast on the Higher Ed Live Network, a project of EDUniverse Media. Find us at higheredlive.com and join the conversation on Twitter using the Advancement Live hashtag. I'm your host for today's show, Andrew Gosen. I have two guests with me this afternoon. Ryan Davies joins us from Carleton University in Ottawa, and Colleen Wainwright, the communicatrix, joins us from Los Angeles. Today's show is going to examine the potential of crowdfunding and institutional advancement, but we can't do that without first giving a shout out to the sponsor that makes Advancement Live possible. Today's show is sponsored by iModules. iModules software is the leading constituent engagement management provider for educational institutions. iModules delivers an integrated online platform that transforms how institutions strengthen constituent relationships and achieve fundraising success. Conversations like the one that we're about to have wouldn't be possible without the support of iModules, so let me be very clear as we get started. iModules, we really appreciate it. Today's show is going to look at the potential impact of crowdfunding on higher education. This is a complex topic, and this will not be the last show that we do on the subject. The goal of today's show is to kick off what I hope will be an ongoing conversation about a fundraising model that is going to have a profound impact on advancement in higher education. So to start with, let me provide a little bit of context and let me tell you why I think that is the case. It has to do with the disruptive influence of the digital revolution that has changed the world that we live in so much over the past decade. Most people concede at this point that the rise of digital networking platforms has devastated some sectors of the economy, the print media for instance, and supercharged others. Institutional advancement is not immune to this. We can pretend it's not happening, but our constituents are spending an increasing amount of their time in this rapidly evolving, highly networked environment. If we don't deal with that reality, our ability to remain relevant in their lives is going to suffer. We can argue that love for the alma mater will win out in the end, and in some cases that may be true, but there's lots more competition out there than there used to be for the attention and the philanthropy of our alumni. The assumption that we can keep doing what we've always done and expect the same returns in terms of dollars and loyalty simply doesn't hold together anymore. Let's think about this in terms of the areas included under the institutional advancement umbrella: communications, alumni affairs, and fundraising. Putting it bluntly, we are losing the level of centralized control that has served us so well for decades. Two of the three legs of advancement have already been hit by digital disruption. Communications felt it first in the late 90s and early 2000s as technologies such as blogs appeared. It used to be that only professionals could produce content and disseminate it to audiences. Now, with blogs, any user can generate content and share it easily without permission or oversight from anyone. Alumni relations was next to go, facing its moment of dislocation in 2007, when Facebook exploded beyond the walls of the EDU community. It used to be that no large-scale alumni activity could take place without the involvement of the alumni office because the institution controlled the database. Social networking platforms have now made it possible for alumni to self-organize without the permission or awareness of the institution. The fundraising leg of the tripod has been relatively insulated from digital disruption until now. In a large part, this is because most of the people who are giving at the major and principal gifts level are older. They don't tend to be early adopters, and in the short term, it makes sense to focus limited resources on the demographic that is most essential to current campaigns. However, we do need to think about the future. If you've been working in advancement, you're probably aware that our alumni are using crowdfunding platforms. We're seeing individual alums asking for our help in getting their projects in front of the alumni audience. We're seeing student groups and alumni affinity organizations asking to use crowdfunding platforms to raise money for their goals. What's important here is that development offices used to have a monopoly on how money was raised and what it was raised for. With the advent of crowdfunding platforms, that control is slipping. We can tell individuals and groups that no, we won't help them, but they now have a tool that they can use to go around us. Sure, we can tell them that it's not allowed and send them cease and desist notices if they use the institution's name or logo, but do we really want our relationship with our audience to degenerate into one of policing their behavior? We need to work with our constituents, not be adversarial. This is a case in which the carrot is a better approach than the stick. We need to be better attuned to the behavior of younger generations of alumni, parents, and friends. We need to think about current students. We need to acknowledge that even if these populations aren't the key to current campaigns, they're the key to future campaigns. Their philanthropic habits and expectations are taking shape right now. It's widely accepted that it is cheaper to retain a donor than it is to acquire or reacquire one. In order to keep our audience connected to our institutions, we need to meet them where they are and give them opportunities to give that make sense to them. If you look at giving patterns of this demographic, one of those places, one of those opportunities is crowdfunding. Also, on a very pragmatic level, donation-based crowdfunding platforms are projected to raise $1.4 billion in FY14. Do we want a piece of that, or are we going to leave it on the table simply because we haven't done this before? These are important questions, and with that, let's turn to our guests. Today's first guest is Ryan Davies, who is joining us from Carleton University in Ottawa. As Director of Advancement Communications, Ryan gets to work in all aspects of development and alumni relations and collaborate with his many talented colleagues at Carleton University. Prior to joining the post-secondary sector in 2006, Ryan spent 6 years in public utilities and corporate communications in Western Canada. Carleton University launched a crowdfunding pilot project in March of this year that is called Future Funder, and a link to that website is being tweeted out right now. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Andrew.
So Ryan, to start with, could you tell us a little bit about how Carleton decided to explore crowdfunding?
Well, I would say it probably came for all the reasons you outlined, but the real driving factor was we heard it from our donors. Carleton held a series of focus groups with annual giving type donors in the fall of 2011, trying to sort of get at what their motivations were, what sort of projects they were looking for, how our appeals were resonating, those sorts of questions. And we heard from them very clearly then that the mindset of the modern donor seemed to be shifting. That these donors, even their $50 donors, $100 donors, $500 donors, they wanted to be a part of a winning project in a way. They wanted to see projects that they could have a role, have a stake in realizing. They wanted to see themselves making a very specific difference. They wanted to know that what they were giving to was something very tangible. So after some thought, some debate, we sort of sought for the word that described what they were talking about, and we came at crowdfunding. We kind of toyed with this idea of microgiving, or is it project-based fundraising? It's all of those things, and together that means crowdfunding. So I would say it was a donor-inspired kind of shift for us.
I love the fact that you're both asking donors questions and then you're taking seriously what they tell you. It feels to me like one of our bad habits is asking them for their input because we feel as though that's the way we ought to engage people, but we actually don't have much expectation of incorporating what they're telling us into what we actually do. So I salute you for both aspects of that equation, for the asking and then the doing something about it. So I love the notion of a donor-centric approach to giving, and I think crowdfunding is a remarkable model for doing that. But I'm also interested in how your internal conversations with your colleagues went down. Were there any concerns or points of resistance that caused people to be wary of moving in this direction?
There were, and there still are. There were, I think, two things that we really had to carefully consider. The first is what you might call the inherent democracy of crowdfunding. There were some reservations that if we were completely free and open in say in the Indiegogo model, if we allowed just anybody on the campus community to get a project up and going, that we might see projects that maybe were off strategy, that weren't part of the institutional fundraising goal or overall goal. So that was one of the reservations. A second is this lingering one around privacy and the relationship with donors. And traditional fundraising is so dependent, of course, on moves and moves management. And I think internally we had this fear that somehow connecting the owners of individual projects through crowdfunding with their donors might somehow disrupt that process. So privacy and the democracy of projects. I'll add on the democracy subject, the open book kind of quality, putting the success of a project out there for anybody to see, felt like a risk to a lot of us, that we might not make it, we might not be successful for every single project, and it felt like that was a step we weren't, maybe not quite ready to make.
That's interesting. Two things that you're saying pop out for me. The first is the issue of risk aversion, and I think that relates to the issue of putting a project out there that might be publicly seen to not be achieving its goals, and how that's sort of damaging to, I could imagine someone arguing that that's damaging to the brand because people want to be part of a winning team. But I feel like culturally, perceptions of brands online are shifting in such a way that excess conservatism may actually hurt you. I think contemporary donors, contemporary users are actually excited to see that the organizations that they're engaged with are taking risks and are okay with putting themselves out there a little bit in a way that may not be the way they've done business historically. So that's one interesting dimension. The other thing that kind of blows my mind is the notion that because of privacy concerns, you might want to separate the donors from the people who they're actually helping, and have that mediated by some sort of a professional mediator doing stewardship letters, stewardship reports, so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. I think especially if you look at things like the millennial donor surveys that have been coming out over the past 2 or 3 years, one of the things that people seem most anxious for is a sense of the direct, tangible, highly textured impact of their giving. And it's just interesting to hear that we're getting that message from a certain section of donors, and then there are people internally who are trying very hard to keep that from happening.
You know what ultimately kind of won out for us was the notion of enthusiasm. I think it kind of, it addressed the democracy concerns, it addressed the donor relations concern. If we could inspire more enthusiasm for giving within the campus community to get more people both aware of and engaged in fundraising and successful outcomes in fundraising, if they felt like they had a stake in its success and directly realized the outcome, if they, their project was successful because of these donors, they would be enthusiastic about saying thanks and doing that stewardship. So to us, that really won out, and it kind of addressed the concerns. We could embrace a newer, freer, and more passionate culture of philanthropy on campus through this model.
That's great. I love the notion of a passionate culture of philanthropy. It feels to me as though there's sort of passion gap emerging between higher ed and many of the other types of nonprofits that are out there, and that we can't afford to let that gap grow too wide, or we're actually at fairly serious risk of losing a bunch of the people who we've come to depend on and who we will be depending on in the future. So getting back to the internal politics and discussions, who all was involved in the conception of your project? Was it housed in one particular business area, or were multiple units involved?
Multiple units. It's a kind of a joint annual giving and communications, advancement communications initiative. So like I said, the focus groups is where it started, and those were, we came at that initiative together to sort of meet our donors and hear what they were saying, and then once we learned what they were saying, we kind of tackled the solution together.
As you were trying to wrap your head around the crowdfunding model and this broader space to figure out how to deploy this within a Carleton context, what resources did you rely on as you did that due diligence and that research?
There are a variety of places we went. I would say we found your writing on the subject, Andrew, and we looked to that as a model. We have a number of faculty who we have a School of Journalism and Communication here at Carleton, and we try to engage them as much as possible to hear the academics' point of view on crowdfunding and in a higher ed context. But one I got a lot from was the Sci-Fund Challenge, the academics in the U.S. driven. I think there was an academic at UC Santa Barbara who engaged some other academics, other science researchers to try and crowdfund for their research projects. And we followed that really closely and looked at their experience as maybe a model for us and a way to kind of communicate what we were trying to do back to our own faculty members.
That's great. It's so, especially at the point where we are right now with numerous pilot projects underway within higher ed, but nothing that's incredibly well established, with the possible exception of Middlebury's Mid-Start program. We can't do our normal thing of benchmarking against the rest of higher ed. We actually need to look beyond our usual advancement walls and acknowledge the fact that the rest of the world is out there and that they may have something that we can learn from. So, could you tell us a little bit about the platform that you're using? It's a custom-built solution, right?
It is. It's based on WordPress, which is the content management system for the university. It was built by a local digital marketing agency with whom we had a long-standing relationship. They're very skilled and practiced in, of course, in the social media sector, but we'd worked with them for a number of years. They'd worked with other Canadian universities, so they knew the higher ed sector really well. They got what we were saying right off the bat, and they could respond to our needs. And then, of course, they could work in WordPress, so it was a fairly easy thing to adopt. If you can see by the design, if you're on the site, we mimicked kind of the best of crowdfunding, the best of, if you can call it, traditional crowdfunding sites. It looks a lot like Indiegogo, and it's that same kind of interface, which perhaps is the standard for crowdfunding nowadays.
If you were to talk about the pros and the cons of the custom approach versus working with a third-party provider, what would you highlight as the key issues involved in making that kind of a decision? Well,
that the first question we get every time when we talk about this is, why don't you just use Indiegogo? The traffic is better there. There's more visitors, there's more volume, there's just more going on there. And while this is true, what we can offer in our own custom developed site is differentiation. And by that I mean simple things like we don't have to charge a fee. There's no clawback at all from the donation back to us, back to the university. It all goes 100% to the project. And then the second piece is that we can offer a tax receipt. That every gift is, because we've done some advanced work on the project to ensure that it is receivable according to Canada Revenue Agency guidelines. We can offer a full tax receipt to the donor. That's why we thought this worked. This is what separated us from Indiegogo or maybe other third-party solutions, is that we didn't have to pay a fee, and that we could make this a purely charitable relationship.
Fantastic. So you've been live since March. What's been your biggest success so far?
In terms of projects, the biggest successes are two things: projects involving library collections, and projects involving memorial funds, so scholarships set up and tribute to faculty members or graduates who may have passed away. Each of them are successful, I think, for different reasons. The library collections are very tangible. They're very, I think everybody who has a university background can understand what that means to have books versus no books. And then on the memorial funds, I think what works there is that there's a real personal connection, and there's a sort of a ready-made network of donors, of prospects, of people who are interested in engaging in that project. So that's been successful from the project. Those two have been successful from the project point of view. From the kind of the overall strategy point of view, what we like is what we talked about earlier is the culture of philanthropy. I think we've kind of changed the conversation a little bit on campus, and had faculty members and students now come to us saying, "I've got this project. I don't have the funds for it. Can I get on this? Will it work for me?" That's sort of a new conversation for us. It used to come in, apologies for the phone here, used to come from different directions, maybe through the deans or through leadership, but now we kind of have this grassroots appreciation for the work we're trying to do in advancement.
That's fantastic. I think talking about senior class gift campaigns and other attempts to teach students the culture of philanthropy, giving them a tool like this where they can actually help themselves while they're still students, seems to me to be the most efficient possible way of getting them to understand this in a very visceral sense, as well as getting them to understand that as soon as they're young alumni, they will have the ability to impact the lives and the projects of current students in a way that they were helped just 2 or 3 years ago. That feels to me like it's not only teaching culture of philanthropy to the students, but it's also positioning the institution to make a much more compelling case for support to younger alumni. It's like a virtuous circle.
Yeah, I think that's right. You know, we joke about there being kind of an icky factor around fundraising. People don't want to talk about it. You have to be really engaged in it to feel like you want to participate in it at all. But there's something different about crowdfunding. It sort of takes that icky factor away. Maybe it's something about the license we give to the donors. They can be very directive about their gift and directive about their impact, and it takes it away, gets it out of this kind of conversation about asking for money and more about giving people who want to give the ability to choose where they make a difference. That just changed it a little for us and improved the conversation.
Fantastic. So for a final question before moving on to Colleen, there's been some concern out there about crowdfunding taking dollars away from other ongoing fundraising initiatives, especially unrestricted annual fund appeals. Have you seen any evidence of this, or is it too early to tell?
It's a little early to tell. We have only been live since March, but our feeling is that that's not happening. We're on pace in all other areas, and in fact we're on pace to triple our web giving with this in place now. I think this is just another venue, just another way for people to choose to make their gift, a new vehicle for accepting the gift. I don't think it cannibalizes the others.
Great. Ryan, thank you. Having spoken to a number of institutions about crowdfunding over the past year or so, my sense is that a lot of people are interested in exploring the area, but they don't really know where to begin. And for people in those situations, I'm certain that getting some insight into how you at Carleton went about thinking about the space and then dipping your toe in the water, so to speak, will be incredibly useful. So now let's depart from the institutional perspective as represented by Ryan and Carleton and turn to someone who has walked the crowdfunding walk and used it to raise dollars for a cause that she cares about. Our next guest is Colleen Wainwright. Colleen is a writer, speaker, consultant based in LA who started calling herself the communicatrix when she hit 3 hyphens. She spent 10 years as an award-winning TV copywriter, crafting ads for brands like Wheaties, Gatorade, and Jell-O, and another 10 acting in them for cash money. Since deciding she'd blow her brains out if she had to sit through one more meeting about the way in which bears danced around a cereal box, she has spent most of her time teaching other creative souls how to talk about what they do in a way that wins them attention, work, and satisfaction, and the rest of it horsing around on the internet. In 2011, Colleen used herself as a guinea pig for her own theories on social media and attention, raising over $50,000 in 50 days for Right Girl, a local Los Angeles nonprofit benefiting high school girls. Viewers, I'm tweeting the link to the 50 for 50 project page on Indiegogo, and it is well worth some time checking it out. Colleen, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm really excited to be here. It was fantastic listening to you and Ryan talk about how this works in higher ed, so I'm really excited about being here.
Well, and I'm excited that you can bring a perspective from outside higher ed, especially the perspective of somebody who's had such a great project, such a great success under your belt. So to start with, could you tell us a little bit more about the 50 for 50 campaign? How did you come up with the idea, and then how did you decide to pursue it through crowdfunding?
Sure. The idea came together in bits and pieces. I had this big birthday, this 50th birthday imminent, and one wants to mark occasions like that. And I'd done a lot of other things, but I'd never really tried to do any kind of give back sort of huge thing on my own birthday. And at the same time, I'd been talking social media for a long time and helping individual clients, but I'd never really put what I'd said, into effect, and raise dollars and attention all in one place very publicly and visibly. So I figured this was kind of a way of combining all those things, doing a little good, and so yeah, the whole thing kind of came together over a year and a half, but then really quickly in the last few months before the campaign went live.
And you had long flowing locks of hair before you embarked on this project, right?
I I did. My hair, you'll see in the video if you watch it, I take it down at one point. It's very dramatic. And it was somewhere around here. It depended on how curly it was being that day, or how humid it was outside. But yeah, it was a pretty substantial amount of hair that I let go of for this.
Okay, so the deal, right, was that if you hit the $50,000, you were going to shave it all off, I think.
Right. That was sort of a wow factor thing. That, yeah, a little cherry on top. That 50,000 in 50 days, and then if I did it all at the fundraising party, which I also, charge tickets to, part of the campaign. Yeah, I would shave it all off in front of the attendees.
Well, I look forward to a day when we can get a dean or a president to shave his head or her head at the successful completion of a crowdfunding campaign. Now, since this show is for an institutional advancement audience, I know that there are viewers who are going to be interested in the bottom line of your project. Right. So the 50 for 50 campaign raised $61,517 on a goal of $50,000 and involved 1,065 donors. First, tell us about setting your goal. Did you go for the 50K because of the birthday dimension of the project? Did Right Girl have a specific need for 50 grand? And did this goal feel attainable to you, or was it a proverbial big, hairy, audacious goal?
Total BHAG, total. And the 50 was absolutely partly because it was just big. I wasn't really intending to do that much initially, but as far as branding and memorability goes, to have it be bigger is better in this case, and to have it tie in with my 50th birthday worked well, because then everything wound up being about 50-50-50. It just made people, I mean, a lot of people, between the shaving my head, this old lady shaving her head, and then this whole raising $50,000, I think that won me a little bit of attention. Right Girl was happy for anything that I could raise for them. And in fact, I came up with the idea to raise the money before I selected the nonprofit that I wanted to do it for. It was really driven by my desire to give back and to test this out, and then I wanted to find something that would be a good fit. So that was part of the whole thing, was thinking, which I'm sure that, as you've done with your own campaigns, you start thinking these through and you try and get as many elements to work together and complement each other, because it reduces heavy lifting. There's already enough heavy lifting in giving.
Sure, sure. So over 1,000 donors, was that about what you expected?
It's, I was absolutely prepared to start calling close friends and family towards the end and begging, or even putting myself into hock and say, okay, give 1,000 and I'll give it back to you, and have this sort of embarrassing 100 people giving. So I was really thrilled that it was that many. It's a pretty good per person donation as far as these things go. There were a couple of large donors, but for the most part it was smaller donations, which made me very happy.
You mentioned something about a 1.5 year lead time. Once you were ready to launch, did you have a pre-scripted launch and marketing strategy, or was this something that you made up as you went along?
So it was both. I had some elements that were in place, but I think part of, and this may be scary for institutions, I don't know, I would imagine it's scary for institutions because it's scary for just one lone control freak. There's a certain amount of planning that has to happen, and then there's a certain amount of living in the moment that has to happen, and flexibility. There were components of the campaign that did not exist up until right before. One of them was starting this blog where I did interviews with 15 women writers, and part of that happened when, towards the end of my prep time, I had about 5 or 10 days left to go, I realized there was no way I was going to be able to maintain this kind of background stuff and content creation for 50 days. So again, to reduce the load on me, I said, oh, I'll just come up with a questionnaire and go out and find 50 women writers from different communities, hopefully, so that they can draw their people in. And that was like a last-minute, stroke of genius or whatever that I take no credit for. And then coming up with video halfway. I did no video other than the main donor video at the beginning, because I didn't think I needed it. And then there was a real lull in giving, and I know it's traditional in the course of these campaigns, but it doesn't help when you're in it, when you're watching your numbers go down. So I thought, well, maybe video would reinvigorate it, and it actually did, and it opened this whole other channel. So it was definitely, the branding and a lot of lining up the perks and, certain strategic elements like the video and perks and having everything be 50s and the design and all that. Those had to be planned out, but then a lot of it was a lot more than I really wanted to admit, was definitely played by ear.
So there are two pieces of your comments which were fantastic that I just want to draw out here for an advancement audience. The first is the notion of almost daily pieces of content. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the things that makes crowdfunding qualitatively different than anything else in the institutional fundraising toolkit. We're very good at the phone-a-thon campaigns that happen during particular parts of the year. We're good at the direct mail solicitations. We're good at e-newsletters that come out once a month or quarterly. We're good at the alumni magazine model. But being able to connect an audience with a particular person or group of people who are working in a particular area and enable almost daily contact with them is really something that's unique and, in my view, highly compelling. The other thing that I really liked about the way you articulated that was the fact that it doesn't necessarily have to all be on you. You can crowdsource some of the content as well.
Absolutely, and I would highly recommend it because I don't care, even famous people, you know, and now we could talk about celebrities who got into this later if you like, but nobody's got the lock on an audience, and you never know where an idea is going to resonate. There may be somebody who you don't know, you haven't met yet, for whom this is like a fantastic project to get involved with. And I met a lot of those people, totally new people, through, well, it turned out Cheryl Strayed, I knew her as Dear Sugar back then, or Gretchen Rubin's audience, or Danielle Laporte. I mean, there were all these women who had, you know, writerly, readerly, you know, literarily inclined women. I just didn't know, and they were drawn in by their people. So it's incredibly important, and people feel personally invested too. If you invite them in to help create content, they really feel like they have a much bigger stake in things. So that was a little strategic on my part, because I know that people, you know, there's that whole pride of ownership thing.
And presumably then you stay in touch with those people after the campaign's over, right? So that's another interesting, unique nuance to the crowdfunding model, is that on one level it's a transactional giving transaction, but at the same time you're connecting people in such a way that they can remain connected after the project concludes. And in my mind, this is actually it's as much of an engagement strategy as it is a fundraising strategy, in that those are the sorts of relationships that once they come into being are going to knit the fabric of your constituency together ever more tightly over time. So you're doing a short-term project-based, we're fundraising for 30 days play at the same time that you're creating these relationships that are going to pay much longer-term dividends.
That's such a good point, and just super briefly, one of the few things I really wish I had done differently is work more closely with Right Girl so that they understood what was going on, because they were really very new to this whole, like, they were totally new to crowdfunding and less comfortable with social media than more traditional forms of fundraising and giving, and it was much more the grant model for them. And I don't know that they were prepared for they were overwhelmed by how many people came in. She told me, I mean, Karen said, I was not expecting this to work at all. So I should have done a better job prepping that and prepping them. We may have lost some opportunity there, but I do know that it